I think the way that I like to characterize it is it's Reiki's clearing. And so the process I do in a Reiki session is I'm working through the seven chakras. I start at the crown chakra and I work down. And sometimes I'm even visualizing like the chakra spinning and like releasing old dust or getting brighter and brighter, whichever color it's represented by. And so, like, I would call Reiki sort of like Drano for your soul. As we move through the day, we're exchanging energy with people, we're coming into energy with places. And
welcome to the Spiritual Ride with your host, Alyssa LeBlanc. I'm an actress, content creator, and certified life coach. I spent most of my life depressed, in toxic relationships, full of self-hatred, and completely lost. It wasn't until I found deep spiritual truths, practices, and philosophies that I was able to transform my life into one of immense joy, passion, and manifest so many of my dreams. If you feel like you need a little soul healing, want a quantum jump, or just want to remember who you truly are, I invite you to listen as I share with you what I've learned and what I continue to learn. Let's take a ride. Welcome to the Spiritual Ride podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa LeBlanc, and I'm here with my good friend, Dani Fankhauser, who is a writer, a Reiki healer, an astrologer, and a yoga teacher, which actually makes sense because she's a manifesting generator in human design. Welcome to the podcast, Dani.
thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
She's joining us from beautiful Laguna Beach, which is like my second favorite city in the world. And I wanted to ask you about all the amazing spiritual things that you're into. I would like to start with Reiki. It's something that I've only experienced a few times, but the first time I experienced it, I was like, what is going on? It felt so powerful, and I'm not quite sure why it works.
That's a great question. And I love that you had that powerful experience the first time. Not everyone does. When I first got trained in Reiki, I wanted practice. I wanted to learn more about it. And so I offered to a group of people. My goal was to do 25 free sessions for people. And I did. And I had a whole range where, like, on one end, someone went into astral travel during the Reiki session. A lot of people would have kind of tingling sensations, or they would feel warmth or something like that. And this is online through Zoom that I was doing these sessions remotely too. And then some people would just kind of say that it was like a meditation. It was just, so not everyone has that experience. So I like to set that up front too, because it's different for each time, for each person. If you are someone who meditates a lot or have a background in this, then yeah, your senses are a little bit higher and you're more likely to feel the energy. But it's a great question how it works. And it's something that I love to nerd out on and sometimes go a little too far trying to explain into like mad scientist mode, trying to explain the technicalities of it to people. And most people are just like, just tell me like it helps me relax, or, let's get to like what the benefits are. But one way I like to explain it is that it's like radio waves. So energy healing, Reiki is a form of energy healing. Energy is electromagnetic waves, and radio waves, for example, are they're light waves. They're non-visible light waves, so we don't see them, but they do take information from one place to the next. So they're these light waves that are not visible that are carrying information. And so Reiki is just like that. So it can travel over space. So you don't need to be in the same room, although some Reiki is done hands-on. And it's basically kind of like projecting from one person to the other, or even from one person to a group, this coherent energy. And so, whether that energy is meant to be calming or healing, it's kind of like acting, if you think of like a tuning fork, and then people are able to regulate to the energy that's being projected.
Does it have to do with, because I know, like, if you look at the vibrational scale that David Hawkins talks about, or Abraham Hicks, the lower frequencies are less powerful than the high. Is it kind of like if you're emitting that energy, you're bringing these people up to your higher vibration?
Yeah, sometimes people will ask, like, does this raise my vibration? Because people who study that are looking ways to go up. I think the way that I like to characterize it is it's Reiki's clearing. And so the process I do in a Reiki session is I'm working through the seven chakras. I start at the crown chakra and I work down. And sometimes I'm even visualizing like the chakra spinning and like releasing old dust or getting brighter and brighter, whichever color it's represented by. And so, like, I would call Reiki sort of like Drano for your soul. It's just like clearing all of that because, as we move through the day, we're exchanging energy with people, we're coming into energy with places, and different thoughts, different emotions start to, like, again, information in our personal energy field. And it's just kind of hanging there. And so, like, if you like go for a run or if you dance, like you're kind of releasing it like physically. So Reiki's like that, where it's just top to bottom, kind of going like, and like clearing out that stuff that's hanging on to you. And so it's like once you release that heavy weight, then your vibration naturally like goes up that scale.
Okay, so I'm someone that just believes this stuff anyways because of my own experience and like I've experienced it in my life. But like, so for my mom who always wants the science, how is there science behind this works? Like if you're not someone like me that feels it, but you, the Reiki teacher, might be feeling it, how do you know that it works?
Yeah. So my Reiki teachers were very intentional about the way that they taught Reiki because it comes from Japan. And in Western culture, yeah, we like evidence. So a lot of like psychology, for example, is like an evidence-based practice. So it's been like tested out in a lab um, in order to like prove that it works consistently. But energy work is a little bit different because it's working on the energetic level. And so that means it's not like a chemical, like a drug. It just, because each person's situation is so unique, it works uniquely on each person. And so the way my Reiki teacher described this is rather than it being an evidence-based practice, it's a practice-based evidence. So the more that you practice it, then you see the changes in your life.
That's the same with EFT, which is also, I think it might be Chinese based on like the acupuncture points and everything. But they say that the more times you do it, like I have had experiences where I've released limiting beliefs or released negative emotions, the more times I do EFT. So that makes sense that the more times you do it, it kind of accumulates and your life shifts.
Yeah, exactly. And the only way, again, to sort of prove what's going on is to do it. As much as
Mm.
I can tell people what Reiki is, I have to say, like, you've got to just try it. There's sort of no words that really describe everything that it is.
I feel like that's so true at this time in a spiritual awakening. It's like Joe Dispenza says, like it's not enough to know anymore. You can read so many books about spirituality or spiritual healing practices, but like if you don't actually do it, you don't take the steps, you'll never know if it really works or not.
Yeah, that's definitely true of meditation too. If you think of anyone who's tried to start a meditation practice and does 1 or 2 days and is like, oh, this isn't doing anything. And like the truth is, it's like, okay, meditate every day for 90 days and then try stopping for a day. And then you see what it's doing for you. But I mean, that's what's so frustrating is like you can't get the benefits until you commit to it, but we're always like, well, I want to know the benefits, like to convince me to commit to it. And it really flips around like what I think is like our Western mindset.
I think that's so much like the ego or whatever. It's like, I want to know that it works before I invest the time and energy. But what you said about meditation is so true. It used to be so hard for me to meditate 10 minutes. Now I usually do an hour of Joe Dispenza, which sounds so long. Today I only had time for 20 minutes. And there was a part of me that's like, am I still going to feel as good? Is 20 minutes enough? When before it was so hard for 5.
Yeah, I had a funny experience a couple of years ago where I had done my meditation teacher training, and so that was 25 minutes for 3 months, and then I had kept it up, and I just had some big stuff going on where I was like, I feel like I should be applying for jobs, but I intuitively feel like that's not the right direction. And so I was kind of like the stress was building and building and building. And so there was this one day where I didn't meditate. That afternoon, it was I call it like rage applying on LinkedIn. Like I just went on LinkedIn and I was like, I like it just like started applying for all of these jobs that are like not the right fit. And I was just like in such a state of like terror that, and then for the next couple of weeks, I had to deal with like occasional people actually did reach out and wanted to interview me. And it was like these terrible interviews where I was like not the right fit, and knew I didn't want to do the thing. And but I just remember looking back and being like, oh my gosh, like how can we not make that happen again? Like I never want
It's
to be in that emotional state.
yeah, it's like getting into alignment and then knowing what actions to take, which is really how we manifest what we really want.
Exactly.
So you and I bonded over, we met in a TBM group. For anyone that doesn't know, it's To Be Magnetic. And we really bonded over being creatives that are like obsessed with spirituality. You said something so interesting to me the other day that I would love you to talk more about, how all creativity is channeling.
Yeah, that's something that I've slowly come to accept. And I think sometimes it can feel confronting because it's like, oh, I thought I was creating this. I thought this was my idea. What do you mean that I'm channeling it from somewhere else? But this came to me, I think, in two phases. And the first is when I was writing my first novel, and I had set the goal to write 1,000 words a day. And with just the mindset of like, I don't know how it's going to go. I've never written a novel before, but like, here's what I can do. Here's the word count. And so I did that. And I had an outline. It was based on a short story I'd already written. So I knew like the high points of where the story was going to go. But as time went on, there were some days where like I would just go on a tangent and I would write an entire scene that I had never thought of before. And when I'm writing, I'm always kind of picturing it as a movie in my head. And so I'm just like, I'm honestly like sitting there just trying to keep up. I'm like typing and I'm like, oh, okay. And now they're doing this. And now this person says this. And so it's such a wild experience. And also during that time, I wasn't doing anything else. I wasn't doing freelance work. I didn't have a job. I would write for like an hour and a half to get my word count in. And then I would spend the day like walking my dog, doing some cooking, like do some yoga. I was getting into meditation at the time. So I finished the novel in about 2.5 months. And I had gotten really into the meditation app Insight Timer. And on Insight Timer, they have a lot of teachers do live sessions like on all kinds of different topics. And so I'd kind of started to go down the rabbit hole, like starting out like, oh, can I meditate to help me with writing? And now I came across Dispenza through lives on that, got recommended different books and different like types of meditation. And so I saw this live session that was called channel writing. And I was like, oh, I think that's what I just did. So I go to the session, I'm all excited because I'm like, I think that I did that. It's not about that. It's actually channel writing is kind of like a psychic exercise. It's like for people who are developing their intuitive skills, you kind of like do a little bit of a meditation and then you set a timer and then you might like ask a question or choose like something that you're channeling and then you just like free write. Mm-hmm. So it's more like a specific exercise, but I still had kind of like, I guess activated that question of like, I feel like that stuff was coming through me. And I had also met someone years before who she had studied fiction. She had written a novel right out of college, never published it, went on to do a totally different career. But I met her when I was starting to write my novel and she was like, you'll notice that things you write in your novel start to happen in real life. Because like 5 or 7 years after she wrote this novel that's never published, like she would start to encounter situations that she had written.
That's like
So
scripting. You know that manifestation process?
It is. Yeah, it is. And it's wild because it's like, okay, so as the writer, were you predicting it? Or like you're saying, did you like bring it into being? Did
Oh,
you
wow.
influence
I
reality
never
with
thought of
it?
it that way. Like when you were talking about it, I thought like, oh, you're connecting with a reality that already exists,
Hmm.
which is a possibility, or you're creating it, like the process scripting. For anyone that doesn't know, it's when you sit down and you say, like, I am so happy and grateful now that I'm sitting in my movie trailer working on this TV show, and you write how you want your life to be.
Yeah. Yeah, but this was like so much more off the wall in many ways. Like
Mhm.
there's a short story I wrote about 5 years ago, and there's a best friend character in it. And I gave her a name just out of, pulled it out of the void. And I've never met anyone with that name and didn't. And then, like this year, within a month, met three people with that name.
Oh my gosh. It's not
And
my name, is it?
it's not your name, but I'm still like, you have a more common name. It's like a name that you don't really hear very much. Uh and so I'm still like, is one of these people supposed to be my best friend? Like what's the meaning?
Wow. Does
Yeah.
that worry you in terms of what you write? Does that change how you would write a story? Like if you don't want something to manifest?
So that's a good question. And let me talk about the second novel I wrote and then
Okay.
get into that. Because by the second novel, I had more so accepted that I'm not so much the creator as I am like the secretary. I'm just here to listen and write down what's coming through because someone somewhere has asked me to do it. And which really gets you in a better mindset for writing because it takes a lot of the pressure off. So I had more of that mindset when I was writing. I started to write a much higher word count every day, um, which is great. But I also ran into an issue. It was kind of like a perfect storm where I got my physical body got really dysregulated. Like my digestion totally got thrown off, and it was like I had this week where I was writing so much, like higher word counts than I've ever seen before. It was like I'm gonna finish this novel like a month ahead of schedule. Was so excited about it, and then my body was like, like shut everything down. And so it's really interesting because in Reiki, I learned a lot about how for different spiritual services, on one hand, like there's a lot of nuance. You want to set boundaries, you want to clear your own energy, like you don't want to be taking on other people's energy. But I hear this from like people who are psychic mediums that they can only do a certain number of sessions per day or else they'll like physically get ill.
Mm.
And the way that I understand it, which I'm always learning and evolving this, but the way I understand it is that when we're channeling, our energy and our consciousness is going up to a higher dimension and then like guiding the stuff down to our physical dimension of matter. And so, like, when I'm writing fiction, which is very conceptual, it's like my consciousness is out in like the fifth dimension and it's not where my body is. And so, like, if I'm doing too much, if I'm pushing too hard, then that causes physical problems. So I found that the same tips that a lot of people who do Reiki or who do intuitive readings use, it's like after they're done with their work, they need to do stuff physically. So like yoga, cooking, taking a walk in nature, all of that like very like earthy grounding practices were really important and also explained why with my first novel, I naturally was drawn to that stuff, but also felt like even if I'm only writing for 2 hours a day, I can't necessarily like have a job where I'm doing that same conceptual kind of work. I could have, a job where I'm doing something maybe more tangible or physical. But that was really interesting takeaway for me in terms of like how writing is channeling. And then to answer your question about, what I want to happen, so I write like science fiction, and this novel I was writing takes place 1,000 years in the future. So you know, it's not like I'm writing about stuff in our current reality, but at the same time, I'm sourcing a lot of like the emotional development of the character from my own life. And so what I actually struggled with at this moment, where I was to the midpoint of the book, I was halfway through. I had that issue with digestion, which kind of shut me down for a couple of weeks. And I felt stuck on the plot where I was like, I had like a really detailed outline, and I was like, I feel like I need to like go back and revise. I can't find my way forward. I've lost like the forward motion of this story. And what I found was it was kind of tied into like, the plot structure, but moving in towards how it ended. And I sort of had it end where the main character kind of drifts into obscurity.
Mm.
And I was like, why did she not get to be queen in the end? And that was kind of like the other thing that could have happened. And so then I was like, because with my first novel, a lot of the feedback was like uh, really confronting because it was a passive narrator, and I realized I was being passive in my own life. And so then with this other novel, I had to like consider like why doesn't she get what she wants in the end? Why
Oh,
am I writing it that way? And like, what story do I want to write for myself? And more importantly, what story do I want to give people? Because I'm giving this character transformation where she has to like do this thing and this other thing, and then she has to grow and develop. And so as I'm writing it, I'm healing that in myself. And then when I publish this, do I want to give something to other people where they can like be taken along the ride and experience that own personal transformation?
so many things. I love what you said about healing through your art, because oftentimes when I'm preparing an audition or if I have a part, I'm going on set and I'm preparing, especially when it's an emotional, something emotional I'm preparing, I will sometimes notice like if I'm supposed to be angry or frustrating, something will happen in my life and I'll like create that and then I'll go do the audition or do the part and it goes away. And it's like, it's a little frustrating when it's a negative emotion, but I've noticed that same things with stuff I've worked on in acting class, or like I said, parts that I've worked on where I'm needing to learn something through whatever this character is teaching me. I'm needing to like experience it in my own life in order to heal. So that's interesting that that happens with writing too, but that you have so much self-awareness that you were able to see that how come I'm being passive and what am I trying to teach myself? Or if you're thinking of tapping into different realities where you're picking the story from, it's like you were tapping into the quantum universe where you're being passive, but there's another version of you where you're the queen. So that's fascinating.
Exactly.
I also wanted to ask you about yoga because I've yoga has yoga has helped me so much, and I don't quite understand why because I already have been into fitness, so it's not that aspect of it. But I'll have these like breakthroughs where I'll get in a certain pose and I'll just start crying. And I know you talk a lot about like the mind body connection. What is yoga doing to us?
Yeah. So yoga comes from India, and uh, it predates Buddhism and Hinduism. So it's kind of like yogic philosophy is more than just the physical activity. So the physical postures are just like one small part of it. And it's also based around the chakras. So I talked a bit about Reiki, how I'm moving from the crown down to the root chakra. Yoga is also meant to activate and clear the chakras. So the different poses, even though I mean now we put them together sort of gracefully, and we maybe as yoga teachers we're thinking about different muscle groups and stuff like that. There's definitely other things going on, but I think what we haven't lost is that these different movements do activate the different chakras. And um, anytime that you are like activating your physical body, like you're also shifting the way that the electricity moves through your body. Like if you think about the acupuncture, in acupuncture, there's the meridians, and they're kind of on like these channels of fascia, and fascia conducts electricity. So yeah, basically it's just like we have to think of the body as like matter is the part that we can see and measure. It has volume and mass, but there's also energy. We have our own energy field that's like around our body, but also like all within and all through our body. And so we don't really think about how the energy needs to be moving around our body. But water is conductive. So, like drinking more water helps the energy move through the body. Moving the body in those different ways helps release like something that's stuck. And again, like energy is holding information. So that's why, like, when people say stuff like, oh, you've got a lot of emotions stuck in your hips,
Yes, I hear that all the time.
like I've heard that for years and years. And finally, I understand that we're not talking figuratively, we're talking literally. Like there is those electromagnetic waves that are carrying information, and they're holding the emotion, and it's stuck in that area of your energy field that's overlaid with your hips. So when you stretch your hips, you're releasing that energy.
So when you do pigeon pose, you start to cry.
Yes.
So I had a wild experience in yoga like 2 days ago, and I was wondering if you've had anything similar. The last couple times I was in yoga, I kept in my mind, I would just keep seeing a version of myself 4 years ago that was going through a really hard time, but was in yoga. And I couldn't try to focus on the breath. I try to, like be in the moment. And I kept going back to that version of myself in the yoga class that was just really sad. And what I ended up doing was like in class, did a little inner child healing, inner adult, but I kind of like realized that that part of me just needed me to be there. And so I kind of in my head, like told myself, like, I'm with you. I love you. I'm just going to stay in the class with you. Like life's about to get so good. It's all good. And then I started crying and I felt like I had healed that part of myself. Have you had anything wild happen in your mind during yoga?
That's a great question. Definitely. I mean, I think anytime that I slow down my mind, stuff starts to pop through. And so that goes back to kind of how I said Reiki is clearing. A lot of time meditation is as well. So sometimes I sit down with like a Dispenza meditation, and even though he's talking and like there's like a guidance that I'm following, my mind is starting to slow down. You imagine like the snow globe, like everything's falling down to the ground to like that stillness, and then these like brilliant ideas will pop up. And I'll like pull out my note, pull out my notebook, and I'm like, gotta write that down. Okay,
Wait,
going back to it.
during yoga class?
Well,
Or
this
during
is,
meditation?
I'm thinking of like during meditation, but I mean, it's also happened during yoga, and I can't get to my notebook. And so then I'm forced with like, do I keep repeating this idea in my mind, or do I like trust that it's going to come back to me? Very frustrating, but it's also just like, okay, clearly like I have all of these brilliant ideas, and all I need to do is sit down and get silent to be able to like hear them. So that's a very common experience that I have, but I think it's the same dynamic as what you're experiencing, that something was needed to be felt.
Mhm.
And so the yoga class gave you the opportunity.
And it's so interesting because actually about 5 years ago, I've done yoga off and on. The first time I actually did it, I felt very connected to it, like, oh, I did this in past lives. And then I stopped doing it because to me, it wasn't like working out enough. Like it was this whole
Oh,
identity of like,
yeah.
I need to burn calories. So I didn't do it. But then about 5 years ago, which was around the time that I was going through all this stuff, I hear things. I have like clairaudience, and I just heard this like go to yoga. And I was like, I don't
Yeah.
want to go to yoga. Like, I do enough spiritual things. Like, I meditate, I do this. And then it was like, but I said, okay, I'm going to listen to it. And I ended up going to this class. And now for the past 5 years, like, it's like, even though I didn't fully understand what it was doing to me, it has impacted me so much. And there's a reason why a lot of people do yoga because it does, I guess we know now, it's like clearing the chakras, which is so interesting. I hadn't heard that specifically before.
Yeah. And all different types of yoga. went through a phase where I went to it was a heated yoga class, candlelight with like loud music,
Oh,
like 50 minutes and like very like physically demanding. Like even as someone who'd done yoga for a long time, it was hard for me to keep up when I started going there. But I had a really stressful job at the time, and something about like that I was forced to be fully present just to keep up with the class, because it wasn't just about holding the pose, it was holding the pose while I'm sweating and I can't see anything because it's dark in here and the music is loud. So it forced me to be really present just to like physically keep up. And it was really interesting because it was like that was exactly what my mind needed at that time too.
that's the exact opposite of the experience I had when I went to yoga class with you. So you needed heat and like loudness. I go to hot yoga. That's my type of yoga. When you and I went to like what's it called when it's slow?
Yin.
A yin class with tuning forks, and I need the opposite. I need to just sit with my thought or like let my thoughts be clear and be still. And it was the same thing where it's like that's what I needed. But can you explain? Because I know you also teach a class with the tuning forks. Is that about frequency and what is that doing to us?
Definitely. Yeah. And I think it's different phases too, because I started out with heated vinyasa and then I've like tried different formats over the years. And like now I'm in a phase where it's like the slower the class is, the better. But yeah, so I teach a class that's yin and tuning forks. I also do one that's restorative and Reiki. And restorative and yin are similar. Restorative is more props and more about like soothing the nervous system and feeling really good. Whereas yin, it's like you hold poses for a long time, but it's more about like that deep opening. So more of like you feel in pigeon. Um, but the tuning forks, there's different kinds of tuning fork healing, and it's maybe categorized as sound healing. But the ones that we use in that class are you actually don't hear them very much. They're like weighted at the ends, but you sort of like tap it against something so it's vibrating, and then you hold the tip of it against the physical body. So like you might hold it to the heart, or hold it to like the back of the neck, or hold it to like the back of the hips. And so as it's vibrating at a specific frequency, and each frequency has symbolism. But even more than that, it's the vibration is again being carried deeper into your body. So like holding pose for a long time goes past the muscles and starts to work with the fascia. So it's like lengthening the fascia for like better mobility. But the tuning forks, the vibration goes even deeper than that. And so it's actually like releasing that stuck tension that's like even deeper in your body. And also, if we get into like the spiritual side of it, the vibration is adding volume to it and intention. So like when I first did the training and started using the tuning forks on myself, I was like, oh great, I don't have to like focus when I'm meditating. I'll just like hold the tuning forks. And then I was like, why is this not as powerful as when I go to the class? And then I was like, oh, I still have to be intentional. Like um they're just like deepening the intention that I bring into it.
That intention is also something that's been huge for me in yoga, setting an intention for a class. Why do you think that that works? Is it because we're so powerful that like our thoughts and our like why do you think intention, why does it work?
That's a great question. I know it's like, what is the science behind this? I think there's so many different ways to talk about it. Yeah, I think we're a lot more powerful than we think we are,
Mhm.
but a lot of our intentions, we don't really focus on them for very long. We might think like, oh, I want to do this. Oh, I want to do this other thing. And so we don't necessarily notice the connection between our intention and how things actually happen. But it really helps ground an intention, definitely with repetition. Like if you have a practice where maybe you say a phrase three times when you first wake up in the morning. But during yoga, something I guide people to do is set the intention. And if they've set an intention to like release stress, for example, with every exhale during class, imagine them like releasing the stress with the exhale. And so it's almost like you're using your body movements or your breath as a way to like add volume to that intention. And so like it kind of the two things get associated together where like every movement it's like you're kind of, I don't know if I want to say manifesting, but like you're just um kind of pushing that intention to be bigger and bigger and more real.
Yeah, that actually makes sense. Something that I learned in my life coaching certification was like breathing energy into, like when you're taking someone through an NLP practice, which is like clearing a subconscious belief or something, or putting a goal in the future and you're having them manifest what they want. They tell them to take a deep breath and like breathe your energy into that intention, into that vision, and it actually makes it stronger. And I ask about the science stuff because I know some people care. For me, I'm like, if it works, it works. I've had so many weird spiritual things that people are like, how, like, you're making that all up. And I'm like, if my life changed, I'm happier, I'm healed, it works. So I would like to ask you for my final question. What is the wildest or weirdest spiritual experience that you've ever had? If you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, let me think of one that's like not so recent that I can share it. Oh gosh. Well, I think the one that comes to mind is pretty recent, but I did something called QHHT, quantum hypnosis healing technique. I think
Yes,
that's what it stands for.
Dolores
Yeah,
Dolores
Dolores
Cannon's work.
can. Yeah, and so I just gotten interested in past lives over a period of time. I think the first time, well, okay, so first of all, I didn't believe in past lives for a long time. I didn't really want to. I watched the Netflix specials. It's called Surviving Death, and there's an episode on past life research, and it was just too convincing
That it was
that like
real
these
or that it
kids,
wasn't real?
that it is real, like that
Okay.
these kids who are pretty young, who haven't been exposed to very much, like when they have these memories that like 100% are proven out to be from a real person that they never could have known or known anything about. So that's how the research was done. So I was kind of like frustrated by that because I was like, I don't want to come back here again. Like I used to be a Christian. I want to like go to heaven, like someplace nice. um, so like, but was like fully convinced by that. And so then, as especially as a writer, like I want to know the details, like what did I do in these past lives? Who was I? So there's curiosity, but then in energy healing, I did a training on it, and basically, one thing I learned in the training is like the past life memories that we have are not the pleasant ones. Like they're the ones where we died suddenly or had some like pain that was unresolved. So going to like a past life reading is usually not like not very pleasant. So I kind of like dragged my feet. I did some reading about astrology and past lives too, because there's certain points in your chart where you can start to your chart is amazing. Like it shows your personality in this life, but you can like look at it through a different lens and start to like understand the narrative that you were coming from in the past lives. And yeah, so I did a lot of study at different times, and then I started to look for someone. Um, one of my Reiki teachers does past what's called a past life regression, where it's hypnosis based, but she only did it in person. And she, at the time I was in California, she was in New York. And the reason she does it in person is for two things. First, so she can make sure that you're fully in the deep hypnosis. And second, if something unpleasant comes up, that you are supported. So upon learning that, I thought, okay, I do want to do it in person if I do it, because that sounds like a good idea. So I continued to look, and it was probably another year until I came across someone that I liked, someone who really specialized, like this is all that he does. and it took his calendar's booked up, so it took a couple months to get in. But yeah, that session was probably the most, I mean, in hypnosis, I think what was surprising about it was that you're conscious. Like, it's not like you're not yourself, you're kind of there the whole time, but you also hear yourself saying things similar to what I said with fiction. It's like, this is not something I've ever thought before. Like, where is this coming from? Like, my own voice, my own vocal cords are saying it, but this is never something that I've thought. There were some things that came up. You get to ask your higher self or your soul questions. And you also get to see a couple past life experiences. There were some things where I was like, oh yeah, like I have had that thought before. Like, my intuition's been telling me that already. But then there were some pieces of information that were a total surprise, and some that I definitely did not want to hear. So it was just really fascinating. I won't get into the details here because it is pretty personal, but
I know the
um,
details.
yeah. But I think maybe the greatest takeaway from it was, and this is also coming from religion, like sometimes, like the way that I was taught in Christianity, it was like, God has a plan for your life, great. But like sometimes God wants you to do things you might not necessarily want to do. And you have to just like trust and surrender. So there was kind of like some uncomfortable tension there. And even though I stepped away from religion, I think I brought that dynamic into my relationship with, you could call it, with the universe, with my own higher self, where I felt like my intuition would tell me to do these things, and I'd be like, oh no, no, that's not a good idea. And so I would feel resistant to it. But I think I got so much clarity through that session that I felt finally convinced that like my soul and me are on the same page. We do want the same things. My soul sees a different path towards it that might not make sense, but we're moving in the same direction.
That I felt that in my heart. Because one of my deepest beliefs is like, if it's desired for you, it's destined for you. And sometimes it's hard when we look at our lives and like, we're like, but I want this and I don't have it yet. But I think it's about getting in alignment with your soul and like maybe they know a better way, but like they want what you want. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's huge.
I forgot to mention that you're also a podcaster, part of you being a manifesting generator. Well, Dani, thank you so much. This was amazing. I'm going to link all her info in the description notes. If you're in Newport Beach, you can take one of her yoga classes. It's a really adorable studio. Also, her podcast to listen to. It changes names. What's the name right now?
So I actually changed the name to something that will be permanent.
Okay.
I mean, as a manifesting generator, no promises. I might get inspired, but it's called Seeking Wonder, and it's about connecting fiction and reality. So each season, I release a short story that's like, I use mysticism to create very fantastical settings, but there's always some truth underneath it. So then I do interviews with experts about that topic. So right now we're talking about intuitive animal communication.
And I was an expert on one of the podcasts talking about myself and my dog, Teddy. So be sure to check that out. I'll link all her stuff. If you want to get a Reiki healing, Dani has amazing energy, which you can already tell by listening to this. Thank you so much for coming on this spiritual ride with us. Much love.
Thank you. This was so fun.
Welcome to the Spiritual Ride with Alyssa LeBlanc. I spent most of my life depressed, in toxic relationships, full of self-loathing, and completely lost. It wasn't until I found deep spiritual truths, practices, and philosophies that I was able to transform my life into one of immense joy, passion, and manifest my dreams. If you feel like you need a little soul healing, want a quantum jump, or just want to remember who you truly are, I invite you to listen as I share with you what I've learned and what I continue to learn. Let's take a ride.